There are losses that don't just take away the people we love. They swallow whole our very belief in the meaning of life. I used to be an atheist, convinced the universe was nothing more than a cold machine, running on blind laws. But when death struck like an invisible blade, reason suddenly felt powerless. In the ashes of that pain, an unexpected journey began. One that carried me from absolute doubt to the threshold of faith. I once believed I was strong enough to stand on nothing but reason. Life, to me, was an equation that could be solved with logic. The world was nothing but cause and effect. No divine will, no destiny. Religion, faith, all just stories humans made up to comfort themselves. But then, one day, that equation shattered. The death of a loved one came too suddenly, too cruelly. No warning. No time to say the last words. A room once filled with laughter now echoed with emptiness. Silence grew dense, pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe. The days that followed were a long stretch of meaninglessness. I still went to work, still answered emails, still nodded in meetings. But inside, I was like a puppet with its strings cut. Every morning, I asked myself, what am I even living for? Even the most logical answers felt lopsided, hollow. I clung to science, the thing that once gave me a sense of control. But books couldn't explain why I hurt this much. Why loss could drain all color from the world. Physics formulas, cosmic laws. They all stayed silent when I asked, where are they now? I began to notice the emptiness wasn't only around me. It was inside me. It wasn't a hole you could fill with work, shopping, or parties. It was a darkness slowly swallowing all motivation. And the scariest part wasn't the tears. It was the numbness creeping in, making me fear that one day, I wouldn't feel anything at all. In that exhaustion, a seed for an unexpected journey began to sprout. Though at the time, I had no idea where it would lead me. I refused to accept living the rest of my life as an empty shell. At first, I tried to fill the void in the most reasonable ways I could think of. Taking on extra work, pushing myself to exhaustion at the gym, throwing myself into crowded parties. But after every forced laugh, the darkness was still there, waiting to swallow me whole once I returned to my empty room. Then one night, in the grip of a long bout of insomnia, I asked myself, if reason isn't enough, then what else is there? At first, that question was just a thin wisp of smoke. But it kept wrapping tighter around my mind. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. A gentle hand resting on my shoulder in comfort. The glance of a stranger in a busy street. The soft greeting from an old vendor selling snacks. From those small fragments, I began to trace new paths. I accepted an invitation to a coworker's prayer meeting. Initially just out of politeness. But found myself stunned by the peace filling the small candlelit room. I started reading books on philosophy and religion. The very things I once dismissed as wishful thinking. I spent hours listening to stories from believers in an unseen power. Not to agree, but to understand why they found peace there. The more I explored, the more I realized this journey wasn't really about finding answers, but learning to ask different questions. Instead of why did this happen? I began to ask, how can I live after it's happened? Though still doubtful, I stopped avoiding the presence of faith. Like walking through the night and spotting a faint light far away. I didn't know what it was yet, but I started to step slowly toward it. And with every step, the darkness inside me grew a little less dense. The faint light I had been following finally led me to an unforgettable moment. It was an autumn morning, and I sat inside a small mountain temple. A place I had come to simply change the scenery after months of exhaustion. No ringing bells or booming drums, no elaborate rituals. Just the wind weaving through rows of pine trees, and the soft scent of incense drifting like smoke. I sat down, expecting nothing. But the quieter I became, the more I realized a conversation was happening inside me. Not with the one I had lost, but with the deepest part of myself. The part one had long neglected. I heard a whisper, "You've heard enough." Now, can you let go? And strangely, tears began to fall, not fierce, but slow and steady. As if each drop was cleansing the heavy dust covering my heart. That moment didn't turn me into someone who fully believed in the supernatural. But it revealed the truth: faith doesn't have to oppose reason. Faith is simply a small flame that helps us find our way in the dark, even when science hasn't yet shed its light. When I stepped out of the temple, the sky was still overcast, but I felt as if I had just breathed in a brand new air. The cold wind wasn't biting anymore. It was clear and comforting. I realized that from that moment on, I no longer wanted to deny the existence of things beyond understanding. Not because I was convinced, but because I had touched that peace myself, even if just for a fleeting moment. And perhaps, that very touch was the true beginning of a journey home. Since that morning in the small temple, I returned to the city with a strange feeling. Everything was exactly the same, but I was different. The blaring horns still pierced the air. Meetings still dragged on endlessly. Emails still piled up. But amidst it all, I no longer felt completely swept away. I began to maintain new habits, however small. Each morning, I'd sit quietly for 5 minutes before opening my laptop, just to breathe and listen to my body. Sometimes, I'd stop by a temple near the office, not to pray for anything, but simply to feel the calm space. I still read science books, but alongside them were pages on philosophy, spirituality, and how people find meaning in the chaos. Those around me noticed the change, not through loud declarations or boasting. Instead, I became more patient in listening, gentler in my reactions, and less harsh on myself. The important thing was I hadn't lost the reason that had walked with me all these years. I still believed in the need for evidence, for logic. But now, I allowed myself a small space to accept that some things can only be felt, not measured. Walking my familiar path home, I often recalled that moment in the temple. It felt like a silent marker, dividing two versions of myself. One trapped inside a box of doubt, and one stepping out to breathe the air of both reason and faith. Coming home, it turned out, wasn't about going back to who I was. It was about coming back to myself. A fuller, more resilient, and more grateful version. As I found a new rhythm in life, I realized my journey didn't end with personal peace. Peace, if kept only to oneself, slowly closes off and fades away. It needs to be shared to continue growing. I began talking more with those who were going through loss. Not to preach or advise, but to sit beside them, listen, and let them know that the emptiness they feel is something anyone can overcome. Sometimes, I shared my own story. Not dressed up, not turned into a legend. Just a reminder that there is a path out of the darkness. At work, I chased achievements less and sought moments of connection more. A genuine lunch with coworkers. A message checking in on an old friend. A timely thank you note. These small acts don't erase the world's pain, but they soften its harsh edges. I also carved out a breathing space every day. No social media, no noise. Just to remember that life is more than what meets the eye. This is how I protect the flame of faith I've rediscovered, so it won't be swept away by the rush of the world. Now, I no longer see myself as an atheist, nor do I fully label myself with any religion. I'm simply a traveler who has walked through a dark valley and found a light strong enough to keep moving forward. And I know the road ahead will still bring loss, but I hold a lantern in my hand. A lantern lit by both reason and faith. Life doesn't promise us a smooth path. There will be days of loss that make you feel like you can't stand up again. There will be long nights when all reason seems meaningless. But it's often in that darkness that a small light appears, not to erase the night, but to remind you that you can still keep walking. I used to think I had to choose one side, either fully believe or fully doubt. Now I understand we can live with both, letting reason guide our way, and faith keep our hearts warm. If you're feeling lost, please don't force yourself to find the answers right away. Give yourself time to listen, to feel, to allow something new to enter. Because sometimes, opening that small door is the true beginning of a great journey.